Let us pray. O Lord, we give thanks for the bounty of our province, our land, our resources, and our people. We pledge ourselves to act as good stewards on behalf of all Albertans. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 15, the Alberta Energy Company Amendment Act, 1989. This bill provides for location of the head office in Alberta and for the relaxation of the restrictions on ownership of AEC shares. Bill 15 permits an individual or associated group to hold up to 5% of outstanding voting shares and restricts the aggregate ownership of voting shares held by non-residents to a maximum of 10%.
The Honourable Minister of Energy has moved first reading of Bill 15. Order, please. Order, please. Alberta Energy Company Amendment Act 1989. Those in favor of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Motion carries.
Bill number 15, Alberta Energy Company Amendment Act 1989, introduced by the Honourable Mr. Orman, is now read a first time.
Family and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 8, the Department of Social Services Amendment Act 1989. The intent of this bill, Mr. Speaker, is to reflect the change of name in this ministry to Family and Social Services.
The Honourable Minister of Family and Social Services has moved first reading of Bill number 8, Department of Social Services Amendment Act 1989. Those members in favor of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 8, Department of Social Services Amendment Act 1989, introduced by the Honourable Mr. Oldring, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to table the annual report for the year 1988 for Alberta government telephones.
Minister of Energy. Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table with the Assembly the 1988 annual report of the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission.
I'm pleased to table Members' Services Order number 4, 1989.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for West Loch Sturgeon, followed by the Minister of Education.
It's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the members of the House some 5 members of the Alberta Agricultural Distress Committee seated in the Visitors Gallery, and we're fortunate enough to meet with the Ministers of Agriculture earlier today. And I'd like to introduce them. They will stand. I'll ask for the recognition of the legislature is L. Zine and John Shopman, and Mary and George Schmidt, and Edith Enns. They rise now and get the traditional welcome of the legislature.
Minister of Education.
It's my pleasure today to introduce 2 constituents visiting from the constituency of Calgary-Shaw. They're paying a special visit to Edmonton. They are Leon and Florence Grunding, and they are joined by their brother, Mr. Hank Gertson, and I ask them to rise and receive the traditional welcome of all members.
Member for Vegreville.
Дякую, пан спікер. Я є дуже радий привітати моїх дорогі приятелів і сусіди тут сьогодні. 45 старших чоловіків і жінок з Vegreville. Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to welcome and introduce to you and members of the Assembly 45 senior citizens from the Vegreville constituency They come from around the Vegreville area, some from Mundare, perhaps Lavoy, Harry Hill, Warwick, and Willingdon areas. They're here on a tour today with their escorts, Diana and Alvin Forsty, and I'd like all honourable members to help me welcome them as they stand in the public gallery.
Member for Tabor-Warner.
Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege today to introduce to you and through you to members of the Assembly a very hard-working constituent of mine. This gentleman, along with his brother and sons, operates a successful farming and ranching operation in the Milk River Warner area. He served on the Warner County Council for a number of years and most recently was elected as chairman of the County Warner School Committee. Would members join with me in welcoming Mr. Hovey Reese to our Assembly?
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Speaker, to the Treasurer. Mr. Speaker, any Albertan who looks at this government's use of our tax dollars can see that there's one group that this government represents. One group that this government will always stand up for, Mr. Speaker. It stands up for Alberta's richest families, the powerful friends of government, whether it be the Donald Cormys, the Kipneys and Rollingers, the Peter Pocklingtons, the Germasians, Mr. Speaker. Each one of these friends has ended up mortgaged to the hilt or actually ended up hurting ordinary Albertans. The government is always there for them with our cash, willing to help them out or turn a blind eye, Mr. Speaker. It's called conservative-style free enterprise, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Treasurer, will the Treasurer confirm today that the Alberta Treasury branches are preparing to take out a third mortgage on the West Edmonton Mall?
Mr. Speaker, I can't confirm that.
Mr. Speaker, all you have to do is get on the phone and you'd know that that was the truth, Mr. Speaker. And I would remind the Treasurer that he is responsible for the Treasury branches under the Treasury Branches Act, Mr. Speaker. My question, as the Treasury branches were already running a total deficit of $142 million as of 15 months ago, has the Treasurer even talked to the Superintendent about the advisability of investing Albertans' money in risky loans such as third mortgages?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, let me make it very clear that the Treasury branches operate on their own judgment of what is commercially feasible for them. And I can assure the member that I have no information with respect to any reported loans to any of the people that he talked about. It may well be that there are, and it may well be that there are not. However they come to their conclusion, however, they do it independent of government. What they do is judge it on the basis of the security that they can achieve through the regular kinds of covenants, on the ability to repay the loan, Mr. Speaker, and those are the two nominal kinds of tests that everybody in the credit business use. Now, I know the member may not understand that, but that's how the process operates. What I can not understand, though, Mr. Speaker, is that the member seems to be in conflict. On one hand, he says these are the people who presumably the government is providing some assistance to, and on the other hand, he expects me to pick up the phone to ensure that that happens. Well, Mr. Speaker, we don't pick up the phone. It's based on the way in which the analysis is provided to the various banking institutions, and I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that the member could understand that. Now, many of these people have been through difficult periods, it's true, but I think he better be very careful that he doesn't make some of these statements outside the House, because I'm sure that, in fact, with some of the names that he mentions, there's been no connection at all with the Treasury branch.
Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer, third mortgages are a high-risk venture. If he knows anything about business, he would understand that, Mr. Speaker. Right. Now, my question is, Mr. Speaker, ultimately the taxpayers are responsible, and we found that out with Northwest Trust. And my question is to the Treasurer, how can he now turn a blind eye and say they can do whatever they want when the taxpayers could be accountable later on, Mr. Speaker?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm particularly glad that the member mentions Northwest Trust, because, of course, he falls into the trap immediately. And I remembered telling the people in this House on many occasions historically, in the case of Northwest Trust, this project was bailed out by the Canada Deposit Insurance Corporation to the extent of $270-some million. That money went into Northwest Trust. The real estate was taken out, And we ended up with absolutely no money of the government of Alberta being donated to on the Northwest Trust businesses, Mr. Speaker. And so when he mentions that case, that is a clear example as to how we do operate. We ensure that that financial institution is restructured. The benefits go to the province of Alberta. The real estate is left...
Order, please, Provincial Treasurer. Chair admonishes Edmonton Kingsway. This is not a back-and-forth dialogue. This is happening every day, and it must cease. Honourable Leader of the Opposition, that's enough. Thank you very much. This is not a matter of interference, Honourable Member. It's a matter of discipline in the House, and the Chair has admonished Edmonton Kingsway. Supplementary has been completed. Next main question. Unless the Provincial Treasurer has additional comments. Thank you.
What I have is that obviously I can't comment with respect to what position Treasury Branch may have with this company 555 or any of its associate corporations, because I have no knowledge of what kind of a deal they may or may not have struck, and so I can't comment as to what position they take, except to provide the assurance to the House that the Treasury Branch is a very vital part of Alberta's economy, that yes, we've gone through a period of losses similar to other financial institutions, but I'll be showing to the Assembly very soon that the losses are substantially reduced, and we'd expect that over the next little period, when we study more fully ways in which we can streamline the operation of the Treasury Branch, that in fact become profitable. And so, Mr. Speaker, I think we all know the Treasury branches are a significant financial institution in this province. They're working effectively, and we keep it at an arm's length basis.
Mr. Speaker, will see no evil, hear no evil.
Yeah.
But, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier.
Who believes it?
Mr. Speaker, the role of the former Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs is clear in the Code report. The Minister breached her public duty, and the Minister was neglectful, misguided, and even reckless. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Code found these things out without having full access to that minister's records. Around the time that the Treasurer closed down AIC, FIC, these records mysteriously disappeared in a puff of smoke. Now, Mr. Speaker, I will admit that justice will not be done if one junior minister is allowed to take the fall for the shared responsibility of the Premier and his cabinet.
Hear, hear.
But it is clear under our system of government that that minister was responsible for what happened, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Code has made that clear. My question to the Premier: has the Premier yet asked the Minister of Career Development and Employment for her resignation, and if not, why not?
Mr. Speaker, I would never discuss publicly conversations or considerations regarding ministers.
Mr. Speaker, don't deny it then. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Durwash, when he brought the truth to the minister, was canned, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah,
he was
right.
canned.
For being good.
For bringing the information. My question to the Premier: does not that minister deserve the same treatment that that civil servant got, Mr. Speaker?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not familiar with the name Durwash.
Mr. Speaker, Premier can try to be cute about this matter, but it's not cute. But let me give the Premier a suggestion. Mr. Speaker, if the Premier feels sorry for the Minister of Career Development, he can fire her the same way that he fired Mr. Jeff Davey, make her executive director of something somewhere in a nice part of the world. Has he considered that, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I really find no question in the leader's comments there. I think it sounded kind of foolish, actually.
No substitute. Order. Order. For purposes of the record of Hansard, the Chair wishes to read into the record the direct quote from Mr. Code's inquiry. The Chair was concerned last week that on about 8 or 9 occasions only partial comment was made from this report, and therefore, in the interest of... It's a direction of the Chair. Thank you. The quote for the record is this, the complete quote. The evidence tends, this is from page 419. The evidence tends to show that Osterman's conduct in these circumstances does not fit within those terms because although she was neglectful, misguided, or even reckless, her intentions were not in any way dishonest. That's the complete quote. Thank you. Calgary Buffalo. Calgary Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we know that the Treasury branch has financed over $50 million for Peter Pocklington to take over Palm Dairies. I have here an offering memorandum which indicates that the provincial Treasury branch has recently committed to make a risky $50 million loan on the West Edmonton Mall, which we've already heard is to be secured by a third mortgage. I think it's about time that the provincial treasurer made a clear statement about what role he or his department plays in such loans and in establishing policies for the Treasury branch, since the Treasury branch doesn't have a board of directors and he's the responsible minister under the Act. I'm wondering whether the minister would now clearly tell us about what staff he has within his department for administering and supervising the Treasury branch and what their role is. What do they do?
Mr. Speaker, all of that is interesting information, but it doesn't change my first comment to the member from Norwood. That is, whatever it is the Treasury branch does with respect to commercial loans, it does on its own, makes its own judgment, and I think over the past 50 years the record's been very effective.
Well, even though the minister tells us that the final decision is made by the Treasury branch, could he tell us whether he or any of his staff or whether Treasury Board would be involved in discussions with the Treasury branch with respect to either the Gainers or the West Edmonton Mall loans and in setting overall policy of the government with respect to those loans?
Well, of course, it's true that the overall policy is set by government, and that policy is go out there and make sure you're doing a good job for the citizens of Alberta, assist them through those difficult times the Treasury branch has done, provide the best kind of service to the people of Alberta, and become a very active player in the financial markets in this province. I heard the comments from the Liberal Party previously saying that we're doing nothing to strengthen the financial markets. If anything could be reversed today in discussions here in the legislature is to show that, in fact, we have strengthened the financial markets. We have, in fact, ensured that there's a variety of opportunities for people to invest and to borrow money. And we have ensured that in particular with respect to the Treasury branches, that it's in the marketplace doing a good job at a time, unfortunately, when some of the central banks were backing away from Alberta investments. That's what the Treasury branch does. That's the kind of policy direction we give it. The rest of that, Mr. Speaker, is commercially confidential, and that's the way it operates, and that's the way it will operate.
Well, the minister would have us believe that the superintendent of the Treasury branch is making all the decisions of his own. I'm wondering whether the minister can tell us why there are no board of directors on the for the Treasury branch, which every other financial institution in this country has. Is the superintendent being left to run the billions of dollars for which we're responsible on his own without direction from the provincial treasurer or a board?
Well, it is interesting, Mr. Speaker. If we had this Treasury branch operating the way the socialists would like to operate, that every time there's a loan application it had to go across my desk, you can imagine how many socialists would get loans, first of all, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, that the member doesn't expect us to operate on that basis, Mr. Speaker, and nor do we.
Member for Innisfail. Innis.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Advanced Education. I see the announcement today that the Minister is going to review student assistance programs. I have many calls from my constituents regarding students' loans. My question to the Minister is, will this review help the married students who wish to return to universities and colleges?
Mr. Speaker, last year student finances assisted over some 55,000 Albertans to the tune of perhaps $200 million. In my tours of the institutions, the meetings with the students' unions, the most common questions they've raised is the whole matter of student assistance, student finance, and amongst those questions, of course, is possible increase in assistance to married students. So this review, Mr. Speaker, carried out by the Student Finance Board will certainly look into that matter.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, how will it affect students who win scholarships and then have the amount of their loans reduced?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it must be remembered the role of student finance is to allow those who have the ability and the desire to pursue higher education or post-secondary education to achieve that, and that's why the student finance program's in place. One could make the argument, if an individual has a scholarship in the form of dollars, does that individual need the same amount of loan? So that's one of the review matters that the Student Finance Board will be carrying out.
Mr. Speaker, I keep hearing, and to the Minister, that adult students who cannot receive the loans because they're still living in their own homes or their parents' homes, will that be changed?
Mr. Speaker, that's perhaps the most controversial of all questions. As members may be aware, it's the policy of this government and the Student Finance Board that until a student is away from home for 3 years, that student is not considered independent in the normal sense of the word. That obviously is a controversial matter and one that the student councils have raised many, many times. I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that Mr. Timms, the chairman and the board, would come forward to me with a recommendation either to leave that policy as it is or perhaps alter it, similar to some other provinces in Canada.
Followed by Edmonton Goldbar.
Mr. Speaker, AIDS continues to be a most pressing healthcare issue in our country, not only as well as our province. AIDS, not only in terms of the prevention and treatment, prevention and education in terms of preventing AIDS, but also the care and treatment of those people who actually have AIDS or HIV infection. Now, a recent report, which has been worked on for 2 years by departmental officials, has been released, and it states clearly that $4.6 million of new funding is necessary this year for the care of people who are living with AIDS in the province, Mr. Speaker, yet the minister has only allocated $2 million of new money. Can the Minister of Health please tell the Assembly how it is that the government can find millions of dollars for its corporate friends but cannot find the $4.6 million needed, as this report says, for people who are living with AIDS?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think management of the fiscal capacity of the dollars in this province and meeting the health care needs are two objectives that we take very seriously as a government. Certainly with respect to the issue of AIDS, which is a big issue and certainly one of the most challenging in health over the next little while and certainly into the 21st century, is a huge issue, and we have responded in a comprehensive way with general education programs in terms of the three roles of government, one being general education, one were being reduction of the risks to the population, and the third being patient care initiatives. As we work through those, as we manage through those, we will try and get the best value out of the dollars we have, and I believe that the work being done in Alberta is worthy of support by all members of this Assembly.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that work has been done very ably by the minister's own department in her own report. And I'd like to ask the minister why it is that in this report, which calls for $1.9 million for community care of people who are living in the community who have AIDS, why this minister's only allocated less than $500,000, less than a quarter of what her report says is needed in the community.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in terms of dealing with the issue of AIDS, and particularly in dealing with the forecasted increase, I believe it's very important that we integrate the services of how we deal with those who are afflicted by this disease into the existing health care capability, institutionally and community-based. We have put in place a plan of action. Certainly I will be an advocate to increase support for that plan of action. And I believe that we have, in the estimates of the Department of Health, a very effective plan outlined and the dollars provided to meet those needs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is most disappointing if this minister's advocacy has only gotten us this far. Can the minister then explain to her cabinet colleagues and others that with the rate of AIDS doubling every 18 months in this province, why it is that we're not building up the community sector
where if we don't provide that low-cost health care delivery in the community, it's going to cost millions of dollars to provide for the increasing number of people with AIDS in the institutional sector.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member should take the benefit to go through some of the work that has been done by the Department of Health in this area. And certainly support in the community sector is one facet of dealing with those with AIDS. As well, I think we need to look at the outpatient capability within our institutions and also the need within the institutions to care with those individuals who have the disease. The community component is an important one. We have taken the step unprecedented to go to the community with a certain dollar allocation and search for proposals with respect to how we can get the best value for those dollars in the community. And I believe the community is going to be very responsive as to how we deal with those dollars.
Member for Edmonton Gold Bar, followed by Calgary Glenmore.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during and just following the election in March, we all heard many stories about dissatisfaction in the Tory ranks over the handling of media relations in the Premier's office. That's no secret, Mr. Speaker. Today, we heard that the Premier's press secretary has been appointed to a newly created position as Executive Director of European Relations in the London office of the Alberta government. Now, Mr. Speaker, this appointment is all the more puzzling in the light of the fact that the budget for Mr. Horst Schmidt, Alberta's energetic Commissioner General for International Trade and Tourism, was cut by the government that is making this appointment today. Mr. Schmidt's budget was cut by 3% in 88-89 and a further 10.8% this year. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier is, what is the government's rationale for creating the new post, particularly in light of the aforementioned cuts in international trade and development?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I find it strange the honourable member would raise this question when we've dealt with the matter of appointments before in the House. It was July the 18th, as I recall, responding to the honourable member from Edmonton Glengarry. I just point out to my honourable good friend that Mr. Speaker, that the position was created last year. It is a very important position. It involves a great deal of public relations in Europe. It also involves economic development. These are matters which are very, very much essential to the government's continued growth and investment in trade with Europe. And I was pleased, Mr. Speaker, that we had an individual with the background and experience that seemed to just fit in such a natural way for the needs in that position.
Mr. Speaker, well, perhaps, I don't know whether the Galluses help the answer that the Premier gives, Mr. Speaker, but the House, I think, would like to know of the Premier if the new position was advertised, and if so, where and how was it advertised?
As I said in the House previously, Mr. Speaker, there are some occasions when you have such a match of qualifications and needs in a position that you can, in fact, save considerable dollars by being able to put that match together. I can recall that was one of the situations, in fact, with the appointment of the Honourable Horst Schmidt. He seemed to just have the natural qualifications. It would not have been in any way sensible to go in some kind of national advertising or search, but rather he fit perfectly into that role of Commissioner General for Trade and Tourism. I guess, Mr. Speaker, it may even have been the case in the appointment of the CN chairman.
He's your good friend?
Nice shot across the bow there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, perhaps the Premier will tell us, however, to whom the position will be accountable, its relationship to Mr. Schmidt, and how performance will be evaluated.
Mr. Speaker, if I was to describe the shot, I would say it wasn't across the bow, but rather dead center. However, my good friend, I would say that the position will be responsible to the Agent General in London, and will work with a variety of departments here in the government.
Calgary Glenmore, followed by Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents in Calgary Glenmore, many of them are entrepreneurs and businessmen, businesswomen, professionals, and they have supported and expressed a great deal of interest in taking advantage of the free trade agreement. We've heard about a wide variety of programs to facilitate increased free trade in Alberta. And to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, what has Alberta Economic Development and Trade Department done to help companies take advantage of the free trade agreement?
Mr. Speaker, we have a wide variety of programs that are available to the business community in helping them access the greater exposure to the U.S. market. What we have recently done is held 21 seminars throughout the province, whereby we have invited the business community to update themselves as to how they can access that. We are holding 2 major seminars in Edmonton and Calgary in October, which is Export Month, so that again those individuals who wish to access the U.S. market, now that we have a greater exposure to it through the free trade agreement, we will make sure that they do have that information available to them. Our departmental people will work very closely. We also have exchange missions whereby we expose those in other countries to the excellence of the quality of product that we do produce within this province.
Mr. Speaker, how can a company that has never exported but has the desire and the ambition to do so get started, or what assistance is there available to these businesses to access these markets?
Mr. Speaker, it's as I indicated, we have held 21 seminars. We are holding additional seminars to inform those within the small business community who do have greater access to that U.S. market now as to how they can access the market through a myriad of programs that we do have in conjunction with the federal government. We do have an export buyers program. We have a number of publications that outline these specific programs, whereby there is financial support given to those within the small business community to have greater access to markets other than our own.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, where are the Alberta major markets, and when will where will our emphasis be placed in the future?
Mr. Speaker, that is why we were so supportive of the trade agreement with the United States, because we do the majority of our trading with them, some 70%. In addition to that, some 19% of our markets are in the Asia-Pacific area, and we have a 5% exposure to the European community. Mr. Speaker, we recognize within the province the importance of trade, in that close to 1/4 of our gross domestic product comes from trade. For every additional $1 billion that we do export, the creation of 19,000 jobs equates to that. We have seen an increase in the export of our products from Alberta year over the last number of years, and we are also projecting an additional increase this year over last.
Calgary Mountain View, followed by West Loch Sturgeon, then Panoka-Rimby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On October the 14th, 1988, the Minister of Tourism signed a contract with Mr. Robert Hamilton of Global Chess Group to organize what has since turned out to be a defunct chess tournament in Calgary. Provision 14 of that contract states, Mr. Speaker, that the contractor shall not assign or subcontract any rights or obligations under this agreement without first having obtained the Minister's consent in writing. Mr. Speaker, on October 21, Mr. Hamilton, under duress, was forced to sign over his rights to two people. One was a friend of the Minister's family, Mr. Bobby Curtola. The other was Mr. John Emmer, the subject of a $15 million lawsuit for an alleged TV production scam in the United States.
This change from Hamilton to Emer-Curtola occurred without the required prior written consent of the minister. Mr. Speaker, given that the terms of the contract were breached within 1 week of that contract being signed, will the minister now admit to the legislature that he had no authority under the contract to authorize the province's $100,000 expenditure?
Right on.
Mr. Speaker, we tabled a report which covers a total review of all of the events that took place. The member from Calgary Mountain View is reading from a contract which I don't presently have in front of me, but the report does clearly show that the department, upon receipt of a request to approve the transfer of the contract from Global Chess to Emer-Curtola, was received. They discussed it with the other proponents, the City of Calgary, and after much discussion recommended that the assignment take place, and that's recorded loud and clear in the report, Mr. Speaker, and if you want me to read into the record report with reference to that whole section, I'll gladly do so. It only takes about 2 pages.
Mr. Speaker, given that the Tourism Department's second payment of $50,000 was made on May 3rd of this year, and that the very next day, on May the 4th, the City of Calgary and Associated Canadian Travelers put the whole project on ice, what did the minister do immediately after May the 4th to get that money back?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, again, the events he's discussing are definitely part of the report, and it's clearly stated in that report that the payment was due on April the 15th, and it was received by them on May the 3rd, and discussions with the city administration and Associated Canadian Travelers had agreed on a 30-day period on May 4th, during which Associated Travelers will advise the city with respect to the necessary equity being put in place by Emer-Curtola. In other words, they gave them a time limit to bring forth the equity, and on May the 4th and early in June, after that 30 days had run out, is when they took action.
Well, Mr. Speaker, given the obvious conclusion that the taxpayers of Alberta didn't need to lose a single cent in this fiasco, and that nothing serious was done to recover this money or protect the taxpayers' interests, is the reason for this lack of action the fact that a close personal friend of the minister's family, Mr. Bobby Curtola, was one of the principals involved?
Yep.
Mr. Speaker, the member from Calgary Mountain View has continuously in this House used innuendo, misrepresentation, and distortion of the facts to the point that it's irresponsible and misleading of the public. I think the question, Mr. Speaker, doesn't deserve an answer, and if he continues to follow through, I think action should be taken.
Westlock Sturgeon, followed by Pinoka Rimby.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Agriculture. You know, Mr. Speaker, time and again last few years I've pressed to have the government institute 5-year leasebacks on those unfortunate enough to be foreclosed or quit claim to the Alberta Development or Agricultural Development Corporation on the grounds, Mr. Speaker, that everyone deserves a second chance, even the Premier, as Stetler has done. But in congratulating another shot across the bow, Mr. Speaker, but a large bow, Mr. Speaker, in congratulating the minister now of instituting 1-year leasebacks, surely he must know, being somewhat familiar with farming, that it takes more than 1 year planning to operate a farm. You have to know a little bit ahead of time. So could the minister now consider, if these accepted 1-year leasebacks, moving that up to at least 3 years, part of the way to my 5-year request?
Mr. Speaker, the previous Associate Minister of Agriculture brought in a number of changes in February of 1989 with respect to dealing with stressed accounts. Some of those changes involved the index deferral program, others involved the proportionate quitclaim with the possibility of leasebacks. I'm aware of leasebacks on a year-to-year basis with longer than 2- and 3-year commitments that are currently in place, but I would stress the point that many of those things are negotiated at the time you're resolving the problems with the stressed account.
Mr. Speaker, surely the Minister knows that many of the people running Agricultural Development Corporation are city slickers intending to foreclose as soon as possible. Would the Minister go this far then? Would he instruct the ADC officials to at least offer the lease back in the fall of the year, not in the spring when it's far too late to do any negotiating? At least tell them to make sure that they offer it in the fall of the year.
Mr. Speaker, I would have to take a little offense to the statement that most of the people working in the Ag Development Corporation are city slickers. I would submit that most of them know a lot more about agriculture in this province than the honourable member from Westlock Sturgeon, and if I find some that don't, I will be looking for replacements for those positions. The timing of when leasebacks may be negotiated are going to depend entirely upon the timing of the negotiation with the client. And that is not always necessarily triggered by the Ag Development Corporation. In many cases, that timing is triggered by the client.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the spark of fire there makes me feel like I've been savaged by a sheep, Mr. Speaker, but to go on a bit further, Mr. Speaker. Is the minister aware that for every 3 farmers that have to quit the land, that 1 small town business goes under?
Mr. Speaker, the minister is very aware of the impact on small rural communities of farmers leaving the land, and I might add that so is the associate minister. And it is certainly our goal, working with the Ag Development Corporation and certainly in encouraging other financial institutions, to try to develop their policy with the objective of keeping as many people in rural Alberta as possible at the lowest possible cost to the Alberta taxpayer.
Karimbe, followed by Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to direct a question to the Ministry of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife, and I imagine perhaps the answer might also involve the Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services. Mr. Speaker, as members are aware, and for that matter all Canadians are aware, the province of Manitoba has experienced a severe problem with respect to forest fires. We know that Alberta has sent, it's my understanding, 2 water bombers to northern Manitoba. But it is obvious that more pilots, medical assistance, and overall relief support may be needed in our sister province. And the Manitoba government is considering calling on the United States National Guard for help. To the Minister, as a sister province, is the Alberta government prepared to offer additional assistance to the people of Manitoba? And if so, has this offer been communicated to the Manitoba government?
Mr. Speaker, we're not only offering every assistance that we possibly can to Manitoba, but we're also doing the same for the Yukon at this point, as well as Saskatchewan. At this point, we have 2 CL-215 water bombers and a Bird Dog aircraft in Manitoba, plus 1 helitack crew and helicopter left this morning, along with a lot of equipment, some 100 tents and shovels and a wide variety of other things to help equip crews. We also have 2 DC-6 water bombers standing by in Saskatchewan, as well as 2 CL-215 water bombers that are on what is called a day chasing at Buffalo Narrows, and what they can do is either operate in Alberta if there's a problem or in Saskatchewan. We have also 2 B-26s, also firefighting aircraft from Alberta, also in Saskatchewan. We are also very involved in the Yukon, which also has a serious problem. And we have some 56 firefighters and crew bosses and sector bosses that we have sent there to help them with their problem. So we are doing all that we can. We certainly would do more, and I would suggest the Honourable Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services may wish to supplement.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I wish to direct this to the supplementary question to the Minister of Public Works, Supply and Services. Mr. Speaker, I believe that in the events of Manitoba there's a warning or a lesson to be learned from those events. And I wish to ask, does the Minister consider that Alberta is prepared for a series of events such as befallen Manitoba with respect to protecting Alberta's northern communities and our forests?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is indeed a most important matter, Mr. Speaker. It deals with preparedness in the event of disaster in a particular jurisdiction in this country. And members will recall that it was several weeks ago that I had an opportunity to, one of the estimates that I presented, to point out that in fact all ministers responsible for emergency preparedness or disaster planning in the country of Canada did meet in Charlottetown. But to be very specific on this issue, Mr. Speaker, there is an agreement that Alberta is a participant in fact a leader in Canada, to ensure that such an agreement was raised, called the Mutual Aid Resources Sharing Agreement. And in recent days we have offered to the province of Manitoba, and they've responded with a request to us, that we would provide expertise in the area of critical incident stress. In other words, matters related to trauma. And Alberta Public Safety Services has coordinated, along with the Department of Health, the delivery of a King Air load of experts to Manitoba last night to assist in dealing with people who are involved in the firefighting situation, individuals who might be suffering from exhaustion and stress-related trauma. Those individuals from Alberta are there. They arrived last evening in the province of Manitoba, and we have a standing offer to assist, to provide them with every expertise that the province of Manitoba would request in this matter.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I find helpful and reassuring the last answer, but I would like to repeat my question. And that is, I believe my supplementary question was directed to our preparedness here in Alberta.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Every community in the province of Alberta has had put in place, every municipal government in the province of Alberta has in place an emergency preparedness plan. That's one that has been developed. They began to be developed in the early 1970s in the province of Alberta, when Alberta Public Safety Services was given that directive by this government to ensure that such would occur. Over those years, a large number of individuals from our province have been dispatched to a special training session that takes place in Arnprior in the province of Ontario. It's put on by Emergency Preparedness Canada, and dozens of our municipal leaders each year go to that particular facility to be trained. In addition to that, it was 2 years ago in the province of Alberta, in the city of Edmonton, that the Alberta Public Safety Services Training Centre was established. It's a training center that trains each week dozens of people with particular skills in this particular area: firemen, local policemen, local volunteers, individuals, municipal government, and the like. We are extremely well prepared, Mr. Speaker. And of course, I think, Mr. Speaker, on Monday next will be the second anniversary of the worst disaster in the history of the province of Alberta, the tornado that ripped through this city. And Mr. Speaker, the response that was shown by volunteers and municipal officials at that time in the event of the disaster that occurred to the people of this area, I think was reflective of the preparedness of the people of this province.
Edmonton Strathcona, followed by Calgary McKnight.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Attorney General and concerns a principal affair. It's 2 years since the lid blew off that group of companies. It's 1 year since we knew most of the relevant facts, Mr. Speaker, let alone any extra ones that the police have turned up in their investigation. The Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer in this province. Still not a single charge has been laid by the province under the criminal code or otherwise. Are we to suppose, Mr. Speaker, that the Attorney General has no instructions for his agents to lay charges under the criminal code or at all?
Mr. Speaker, instructions to lay a charge would be made on the basis of full and complete information. Through the 2 years of the code inquiry, there was observations. Pardon? There's full investigation. There was complete documentation, but those documents were not available to the RCMP as an investigating body. They were the property of the code inquiry. There's a process now to obtain all of that documentation, that some of it earmarked to being pertinent, and I'm sure that we will see in the fullness of time charges.
Mr. Speaker, is the Attorney General suggesting for a minute that his policemen could not see those documents at the time that they were produced in the code inquiry as public documents, still less under the authority of search warrants which were readily available?
Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate that the honourable member, which isn't his usual modus operandi, to try and make a big issue that through investigation which is ongoing, that charges or civil actions have not been commenced. They will be when the information, full and complete information, is available. You don't go off half-cocked in one of these episodes.
Yeah, let's go off to Arizona.
What a phony excuse.
Yes, going off half-cocked takes a lot less than 2 years,
That's right.
Mr. Speaker. The Attorney General has probably noticed, Mr. Speaker, that the code report in effect removes the defense from the Cormys on their $10 million deal, in which they retained $10 million worth of assets in exchange for the rest going to the receiver. And so my question, Mr. Speaker, is what steps has the Attorney General taken by way of Mariva injunction or otherwise to tie up the assets remaining in this province of the principal group for the benefit of the creditors of the company, including, I'm afraid, the government of Alberta?
Thank you very much. Question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent of the House to complete this series of questions and for the Minister of Federal Intergovernmental Affairs to make reply to the member for Calgary-Buffalo on an issue which arose in the previous question period? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to make it very clear to the members of this Assembly and the public of Alberta that any actions or charges that can be or may be commenced in this will be, but after the fullness of the investigation, and I'm not about to discuss the particulars of any particular action in this Assembly.
Deputy Premier. Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday in the question period, the honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo asked a series of questions relating to programs available under CAP, the federal program relative to providing social service funding, and he asked that I talk to my department relative to the issue, and I've done so, and advise this, that what happened is that the honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo or his researcher, someone acting on his behalf, was in touch with the Federal Provincial Coordination Unit of the Department of Family and Social Services, and not the Department of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs. And so he obviously didn't know where to go. But, and his allegation, therefore, that the Department of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs was in any way responsible for the province losing millions and millions of dollars because of their mismanagement, and I'm quoting from Hansard there, is inaccurate, and that should be brought to his attention. But I do wish to advise that the issue relating to the matter in question is this, that the federal government requires the imposition of a means test in order to access the funds in question.
It is not the policy of the Government of Alberta to require a means test for the acquiring of assistance in these areas, and it is not our intention to have our policies driven by those of the federal government, which require means testing for assistance from our government. That is a federal policy. It is unacceptable to our government.
Calgary Buffalo, supplementary.
Minister aware that the women's shelters funding, which the government has now accessed as of 2 years ago, requires that very means test funding which the government has met, and that in fact the legal aid system itself has means testing, and that the test is easily satisfied.
Exactly.
Criminal side, Sheldon, just the criminal side.
That is true on the criminal side. This has been pointed out.
Civil side.
This is the civil side, and that testing, means testing, is not acceptable. But the fact of the matter is, I just want to set it very straight. The Department of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs does not negotiate with the departments of the federal government for funding programs. And if the honourable member for Calgary Buffalo wants to get in touch with my department, it is the Department of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs, not the Federal Provincial Coordination Unit of the Department of Family and Social Services.
Better hire Nick for a lawyer, Sheldon.
Clear Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, under Section 168, dealing with the Speaker taking no part in debate in the House, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that when the Speaker rose to finish off what he perceived to be quotes directed to me, I would point out, first of all, they were not quotes. They were words that were used in the Code report, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Code clearly indicated that the minister was neglected, misguided, and even reckless. I'd also point out under the terms of the Code inquiry, Mr. Speaker, the inquiry was limited in what it could find because of the way it was set up by this government, Mr. Speaker. And when making the case for a minister's resignation, we don't have to go the next step and talk about dishonesty. We're talking about doing her duties and using those statements from Mr. Code, Mr. Speaker. So I wondered, frankly, why it was that, is it that we have to use quotes from 800 pages of a book or whatever to determine what we put into it, Mr. Speaker, and I would like your ruling on that.
There are two citations to be made, Honourable Member. The first is from Beauchesne, 323, subsection 1. Questions of order are decided only when they arise and not in anticipation, and this is the part. The Speaker is bound to call attention immediately to an irregularity in debate or procedure and not wait for the interposition of a member. Close a quote. To an irregularity in debate, which applies also not only to debate but to question period. And also in Erskine May, the 20th edition, citation on page 338, it's listed here as two factual bases. The facts on which a question is based may be set out briefly, provided that the member asking it makes himself responsible for their accuracy. But extracts from newspapers or books and paraphrases of or quotations from speeches, etc., are not admissible. The chair felt for the, not only with respect to those two citations, but reflecting upon the emergency debate which was allowed to go forth with this assembly a week ago, that both in question period and in the emergency debate on that day, on 9 separate occasions, there was only a partial quote made from that report, and all of those quotes were with respect to the item, the one sentence which was read into the record today by the chair. And in the opinion of the chair, selective reading or selective quoting is surely not entirely appropriate or fair to honourable members within this House. And it's one of the reasons for tabling of correspondence or reports within the House or any other chamber, so that all members have the accessibility to the complete reports as they are dealt with in terms of the House. And so it is in the opinion of the chair that at least once the complete quotation should be read into the record. But the chair also points out that it was after the incomplete quote or the paraphrasing had occurred on 10 occasions. The chair also points out it would do the same for any member of the House in similar circumstances if they are not being entirely quoted accurately with any other similar document. I'm sorry. There's no such thing, honorable member.
We have to do to ask questions in this House. I think that's reasonable, Mr. Speaker. You said it was a quote. It wasn't a quote, Mr. Speaker.
Are they going to have to do
Where
it
do we
too?
draw the bottom line on this?
They don't have to.
Do we have to read 800 pages in and everything?
Order, please. Order. I think if the honorable member will review the Hansard, you'll see what the chair has said, and that gives proper delineation in terms of accurate quotes. And the whole thing is right there, and the 2 citations have been given. Honorable member. Orders of the day.
Committee of Supply.